Welcome again to my art share. This video is all about Janet, a character of mine I've put in a lot of art since 2008 or so. And I'll be sharing the best graphite pencil drawings of her in this video. I'll put one together with her best color pencil artwork soon. In 2010, I drew this picture of her all in H, HB, and B pencils on 11 by 17 paper. I used a reference for the picture which I've lost. There are two perspective points. If you look closely, you may be able to identify where one of them is. She's sitting on a concrete bench in front of a group of tower blocks. These apartments are where she actually lives, often a suburb of her city. From her style of clothing, it's hinted to be a summer evening. The buildings are facing into the sunset, and the sky has a nice gradient showing the sunset characteristics of light around the horizon with shadowed clouds. I shaded the windows in the opposite direction. This was a stylistic choice, but also to show how late it is, with it being dark near the ground and the last rays of sun only hitting the higher floors of the buildings. I didn't have much experience drawing detailed scenes like this with referenced buildings, so I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. So Janet up close. She's playing with or flicking her hair with her fingers. I guess that's cute. She's sitting with her legs crossed, possibly swinging her one leg. That's why her foot is kicked up. She's wearing the same black mini dress she often wears, and it brings out her hourglass figure, so that's nice. Now, she isn't perfect here, but I actually feel like she complements the scenery, and she's interesting and makes it a nice picture. Making a character naturally fit into a scene, maybe that's something I should talk about in a future video. I do like this picture a lot. It works as a nice bio about Janet and could just as well be a picture about some random pretty lady getting her picture taken. That's a theme I continue on through dozens more drawings. This picture is one of my more memorable ones that I've made prints of and framed to hang up since I think it's one of my best. Janet by the Seaside is what it's called. She's facing the ocean, standing up on a concrete bench on the boardwalk, stretching her arms out, pretending to fly like the seagulls. I drew this picture in 2011. I honestly think it took a couple of months. I remember working on it while listening to 1980s romance music and refusing to doodle with anything else until I finished it. There is actually a song from the 80s that accompanies the picture. This has at least 6 different perspective points for each of these buildings since they're placed diagonally to the boulevard. Janet looks awesome in her black dress, which could just as well be a bathing suit in this. This thing on her right side is her bag on her shoulder. The seagulls are flying into the breeze there, and you can see how they kind of answer Janet's pose, or her pose mimics them. It's cool how her toes are turned downward, sort of curled over the edge of the bench. I carried the background to pretty serious levels of detail. The distance you see is probably miles. Look far into the picture and you can see the buildings and streetlights way down there and a refinery in the distance. A cloud layer hovers over the horizon beyond that, and people walking on the boardwalk cast these long shadows like in a De Chirico painting. Portraying the people like this in these sort of bleak modern landscapes casts a kind of melancholy emotion. The street is an actual place. I may have romanticized it a bit. I don't know. Here it's a seaside resort where she can be on vacation, shopping, enjoying the sea breeze. Once again, she looks a little bit awkward. I personally like how quirky she looks, but of course I'm gonna be the most biased in the world since I made this. I guess you could say I feel like the things that are wrong with the picture are balanced out by the things that are right. Not long after drawing this, I started using colored pencils, and a year or so later stopped using graphite pencils entirely. So this is kind of the end of an era of big concept black and white drawings. So follow-up drawings. Follow-up drawings are kind of like movie sequels. Never quite as good as the original, but good follow-ups, like good sequels, are gonna have their own qualities that make them stand out. Before we get to that, let me describe the picture. It shows Janet on the same boardwalk as the last drawing, but she's jumped down and she's placed her foot up on the concrete wall like she's conquering, holding her one leg there and her bag with the other hand. Janet looks really cute the way she's showing off her legs and flaunting her super short dress that shows off her undies. Her seductive gaze toward the viewer is my favorite part of it. The sea is rolling ashore on one side. You can see the rocky beach, which is maybe why this place has a boardwalk. On the other side here is the seaside resort, where you may recognize the same buildings. I wish I was better at drawing cars at that distance. The net or trampoline looking thing in the background is a piece of civic art that is in the location where this takes place. Tell me if you know where it is again. Unfortunately, what's right with this picture, Janet definitely is, she looks really cool, but it's held down by what's wrong. The perspective is overbearing, and because of the way I drew the concrete wall and the dark shadow on one side, you get this triangulation that looks especially weird in a thumbnail. The architecture is shoved off to one side and is mostly out of the picture, so it's Janet and the seaside with some faraway objects. It doesn't have the presence of the last drawing. The scene started out imagined. It's constructed after looking at the location from different angles in Google Earth, but back then you couldn't get a view of the boardwalk itself. I love this picture, but it's definitely a case of the sequel not being as good as the original. As just a drawing of Janet, it works. It really gives off the aura of her personality, and the environment fits her perfectly. And it's very, dare I say, etchy. I just think I drew this from the wrong angle and didn't put enough background objects in the field of vision. Now this picture here is one I wasn't going to put in the video, but after I looked at it closely and photographed it, I think it's actually not a bad drawing. As you've seen from some of the previous drawings, Janet loves to travel. That's one of her major pastimes besides shopping. Now I have traveled a fair amount myself, and it's always been solo, whether going abroad on a trip or on various business trips. So when by myself, I would notice things, features of different airports, and sometimes I'd be changing flights on a quiet evening in the middle of a week where there were few people around. I'm sure that's what I had in mind with this picture. While quietly walking around or sitting by myself at one of the empty gates, I imagined Janet as cheerful as ever walking by. The airport has a nostalgic look to it, like an older terminal from the 60s or 70s. The long shadows of the evening enhance the loneliness of the scene. I believe the only thing I referenced in this picture was the plane. I think it's an A330, not 100% sure. Everything else is purely imagined. The way you can only see people in the distance by the far-off gates brings out the lonely feeling, but Janet flicking her hair saying, "Fly away with me," is really sugary, and actually the one thing I can't get past with this picture is how cartoony her face ended up looking, and the rest of her is kind of uneven. Her walk looks good and is nicely balanced with the way she's pulling her luggage along, but with the cartoony quality of her face, it brings the picture down for me. A couple of other things are the wall on the left. It's actually a pattern of the logo of the airline. I created my own airline and some other art. I'll do a video of that soon. And there's a sign with gate information way in the back. The building actually steps out toward the end of this glazed hallway, widening to where the gates are. I suppose this plane is just pulling away from one of those gates to go taxi to the runway. Anyway, it's time for me to take off now. I hope you enjoyed looking at my art, and please consider liking this video or subscribing if you'd like to see more. I'm sure Janet would love to see you again.